Well, hello and welcome as we continue our chronological read through of Scripture. Today we begin the book of Deuteronomy. More or less 40 years have passed since God spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai, and Moses conveyed all that God had said to the people. That entire generation is now scattered throughout the wilderness, and a new generation is ready to enter the promised land that previous generation, had rejected. Moses delivers a sermon, actually multiple sermons, to Israel at very specific times and places, as indicated, for example, at the beginning of today's reading. He begins with God's command that Israel leave the mountain that they had camped at and go to take possession of the land that he had promised to them. Moses relates how the numbers of the people were too great for him to deal with himself. So others were appointed to be put in charge of tens and fifties and hundreds and thousands of people to help with leading and especially judging righteously and without partiality. Moses relates how on their arrival at the edge of the promised land, spies were sent into the land at the request of the people, and how the report of the spies that the land was good, but their concern that they raised about the people and the cities and the fortifications scared God's people away, and God's people refused to go in as God had told them. Moses then relates how God was angry with the people for trusting him, angry with the people for not trusting him to deliver what he had promised, and said none of that generation would enter the land. He relates how he too, Moses, was not able to enter the land, though he does not mention the account of striking the rock and publicly dishonoring God. He's not hiding from his own sin, but staying focused on his objective of convicting the people of their sin of unbelief and disobedience so that they'll remember and not return to those sins as they prepare to enter the land that God has promised to give them. All that has been related thus far is familiar to you. Moses is just recounting it for the people who didn't experience it firsthand. We just read all of this in the book of Numbers, of course. In chapter 2, Moses continues his recounting of the past 40 years, really 38 years. He skips over most of it until it's time for them to return to the edge of the promised land where they are presently encamped. He reminds them how God had forbidden them from going to war against Edom, for God had promised to Esau the land that they now inhabited, something these people surely remembered, for it was current. He reminds them also how God had forbidden them from doing battle with Moab, for they were not to receive any of that land either, as it had been promised to the sons of Lot. Then Moses speaks of the battles that God told them to fight even before they entered the promised land. The king of Sihon was delivered to them after he refused to grant them safe passage, choosing instead to come out to do battle against Israel. Israel completely destroyed them in that battle. Every man, woman, and child God gave, Israel destroyed every man, woman, and child, and then God gave them that land for their possession. This served another purpose at the beginning of this coming of Israel to the promised land, and that it caused word to travel through the land of how formidable the children of Israel were. And those in the promised land began to become fearful of God's people. Well, may God be with you and bless you as you continue these readings. As I mentioned, the beginning of this is going to seem very much like a review, but Moses is going someplace with this. He's teaching the people, reminding the people things that they had not necessarily experienced, so that they would not forget them as they entered the promised land. May God be with you and bless you, and we'll gather again together tomorrow as we continue.